Okay, welcome to session number 8, which happens to be the week of Chanukah. I didn't plan it that way. That's just the way it worked out. And it's the final countdown, B'ezras Hashem, to Chanukah itself. 2 nights from now, B'ezras Hashem. Tonight is, we'll call it the Chanukah challenge. Are you ready to take the Chanukah challenge? That's the issue. That's the question that comes up every single year. The truth is, it's all year round. It's the same issue all year round, but this is where it comes to focus. So read something here, which we say all the time during Chanukah. We say one for Purim, one for Chanukah. We say it in davening, and we say it in benching, all in Nisim, which of course you're all familiar with, which goes like this, right? Right here. Okay. It says all Anisa al Purkan, right, on the miracles and the redemptions, Val Gvuras, and the strength of the Shem Shod, Val Shuas, and the salvations, Val Hamilchamos, the wars that were fought, Shasisa Vasenu Bayimim Mehem Bezmanazed, that were done for our ancestors at this time of year. And the one for Chanukah goes Bimei Matisyahu, Ben Yochanan Gadol, Ben Yochanan Kon Gadol, Chashmanai Banav. Right, there were, the days of Matisyahu, the Kohen Gadol at the time, the Chashmonaim and his sons, Kashanda Malchus Yavan HaRasha Amcha Yisrael, that the evil Greeks, right, rose up against your people, Israel, the Jewish people, Ashkicham Torasecha, to try to make them forget their Torah, and to remove them from the statutes of your will, the mitzvahs. And your great mercy, you stood up for them, you came through in their time of difficulty and suffering. And here, this is the part that counts the most. Rav de Esrivam, right? You fought their battle for them. You did their judgment for them. You took revenge on their behalf. You handed the mighty over into the hands of the weak. The Rabbi b'yad miatim, and the many into the hands of the few, utmeim b'yad taharim, and the impure into the hands of the pure, or she'im b'yad tzadikim, and the evil people into the hands of the righteous people. V'zeidim b'yad oske sorasecha, and the arrogant into the hands of those who are involved with your Torah. And as a result of that, you made for yourself a great name, and a great and holy name in your world. Ulamcha Yisrael Asisa Shua Gadol, did a fantastic, spectacular redemption for your people, the Jewish people, or and you redeem them like this day. After that, they came to your holy house, and they emptied out your courtyard of all the strange avodah and different things, and they purified it. They purified your mikdash, your temple, vidliku neres bechatzros kadshecha, and they kindled the candles of the menorah in your holy courtyard. V'kavu shmos yimei Chanukah elu, and then they established these 8 days of Chanukah lahodos lahalel l'shimcha hagadol, right, in order to praise and to give praise to your great name. That's what we say. It's a lot. It incorporates the whole story. It's everything that Chanukah is about, what went on and took place, and each of those lines deserves an analysis unto itself, because basically it really sums up what we're supposed to be accomplished on a daily basis, but certainly during the time of Chanukah itself. And the questions to be asked. But the main thing is it's pointing out, and what we're recalling each year, is how it was all supernatural, because everything should have been the reverse. Normally it works the other way around. Today it's different because of the type of weapon we have. A few people can do a lot of damage to a lot of people, but in the old days, before they had such weapons like that, usually strength was in numbers and military equipment, and you had those type of things, and usually you won the war. That's how the battles were basically won. Sometimes it was a question of strategy. You could have certain strategies, and that would outsmart the enemy, but you still had to have a pretty strong army to back yourself up. It was unusual for a small amount of people to be able to win a war on such a scale that took place at the time of the Chashmonaim. That's basically the idea. The question is, is that all it was? I mean, miracles like that happen a lot in the course of history. We have lots of miracles. People have them personally. We've had them nationally. It's not the only time that we've had miracles like this, perhaps not to this degree. Even the Chashmonaim, the first year, they didn't make a holiday right away. As the expression goes, we came, we fought, or we won. We fought, however it goes, we fought and we ate. It's like meaning that it's all one thing. Usually, if we win something, we accomplish a great thing, we get Sudas Hodah right away. A big miracle happens for you, and you make a Sudas Hodah. You make a special Suda that celebrates the miracle. We don't wait till next year. Something, I'm just thinking now that last year this big miracle happens. How about this year we make a Suda to commemorate? No, you do it right away. And then every year, perhaps after that, depends on the miracle that takes place. A person for whom a life-saving miracle has occurred in their lifetime. Stories of people, for example, who were in a Jeep, and their tefillin by accident, they hit a rock or bump and went flying off the Jeep, and they had to stop the Jeep, get out and go back and pick up the tefillin. In the meantime, as they did that, some rocket came and blew up the Jeep. And after that, it was clear it was a miracle from Hashem that they were saved. And the person like that makes a Sudas Hoda'ah and makes a bracha on the nes every year for the rest of their life. That's the halacha, right? So here's a national thing. It didn't happen that way. They had the military victory. The oil burned for 7 extra days, and only the following year, the Gemara says it's a strange thing that they ask questions about. Why was that the case? They only established the following year that they made Chanukah an actual holiday. And one of the reasons is because, in spite of all the miracles that took place, the Jewish people had miracles taking place all the time, as the Pri Tzaddik points out, and we should point it out for ourselves. The oil burned miraculously every single day in the Beis Hamikdash, at least in the first temple. The Western candle, that's why we have a Ner Tamid in the shul, right? That's supposed to burn continuously. The janitor sometimes turns it off by mistake or whatever, but for the most part, it stays on the entire time to remind us of the Ner Tamid that burned, the Western candle of the menorah that burned continuously without enough oil. And of course, we spoke about Yaakov Avinu going back with the Pach cotton, which had the shemen, and he used this miraculous oil, and Elisha used this miraculous oil, and Eliyahu, and every miracle in the Chumash and the Tanakh that has to do with oil. Now, there's lots of stories of oil that went way beyond its fuel capacity, and military victories too, right? So they weren't sure. They needed kind of a sign. What was unique and was special about Chanukah time that they were able to say, this is different for all the ages. From this point onward, everybody has to know. It's like somebody, for example, who comes across a special portal or something to an escape hatch or something. You mark it for everybody else. If it's just a general escape that everybody can find, and there's no escape there whatsoever, so you don't have to make a big deal about it. If you get out, the next person's going to find it too. But if you find a special trap door that leads to a quick exit that you can get out in the time of an emergency and danger, so you mark that. And that's what happened. They realized the following year, based upon the events that had occurred, that something very unique had taken place, and it's all summed up in Alanisi, that the many were given over to the hands of the few. That's clearly a miracle. But that's not the miracle. That's not the miracle. That's the way the miracle looks to everybody else. The story of Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, for example, right? Classic story that requires investigation. I can't tell you how many times I heard that story before I actually saw the story inside, where someone gave it over and said that his daughter by accident poured vinegar into the Shabbos candles, right? And oil, it wasn't oil. And she comes to her father and she says to her father, Abba, by mistake, I poured the vinegar instead of the oil. And he comes back, and the answer, he says to her, listen, my daughter, the same God who says that oil should burn, which is a miracle, who says that oil should burn? Well, it's combustible. Well, who says that's combustible? God does. It's only, we call it combustible after the fact. After lighting oil so many times in a row, and we find out that it burns, we call it flammable. Then later on, scientists come along, take it apart, atom by atom, and realize these things are carbonate, and they can be ignited. So now we call it combustible. But why? Why is it that way? The answer is because that's the way God made it. That's the way God wills it. So he says the same God who tells oil to burn each and every time. It might be easier if you use vinegar. You know why? Because every time you use oil, God has to tell the oil, burn, 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 burn. You burn last Shabbos, burn the Shabbos too. Burn every time they burn, right? So it's like ongoing, burn. Not like you like the, God said at the beginning of creation, okay, from now on, your oil, you burn. And vinegar, no, sorry, you're for salads, right? It's a different story. It's not like he did it that way. Every single time, that's Chini ben Dosa telling his daughter. So he says, so what did she do? What was she afraid of? That she was going to waste vinegar? Because who's going to use the vinegar once it goes in those dirty oil glass things, you want this in your salad? It's got olive oil too. Oil, it's like, it's been burned before. Who wants that, right? Pour it out, what a waste. They didn't have a lot of money in those days. So, what are you going to do? So she then goes back and she lights the vinegar. That's the way the story is presented until finally I saw it inside and said, no, that wasn't the problem over here. Somehow she lit the vinegar already. It was burning. Her question was, what do I do? I, by mistake, poured vinegar and now it's inside the container and I got to light Shabbos candles. What do I do? She wasn't asking that. She said, by mistake, I thought it was oil. I did light it and now I realize it's vinegar and it's burning. She's coming to her father after the fact. And he gets back and he says, don't worry about it. Well, what was she worried about? It was burning. Shabbos candles. The truth is, it's not, doesn't mention in the laws of Shabbos candles that you can use vinegar because no one uses vinegar because you can't use vinegar. It doesn't burn. So you can't use it. So but you can use all kinds of other oils that are combustible. There's a variety. It's just that it's better. The Gemara says anybody who uses Shemen Zayis will have the children who are Talmidei Chachamim, Torah scholars. So there's a big schus, and plus it's all Kabbalistic and all that. Shemen Zayis, Gematrias, you name it, it's all packed in that. But it's not listed. So she worried that it's not good. No, well the halacha on Shabbos of lighting Shabbos candles is that you shouldn't sit there in the dark. It's not about, it doesn't have to be Shemen Zayis. If you can have something that burns consistently, cleanly, does not jump all over the place and make it hard to see what you're doing, because Shalom Bayis is about, Shabbos is about Shalom Bayis, and you can't have Shalom Bayis when you sit in the dark. So if you can find a way to have Shabbos candles, even electricity, you can fulfill the halacha of lighting Shabbos candles if you have to. It's not the best way, but if you have to, by turning on an incandescent light, making a bracha first. In fact, there is a halacha, you should know, I always forget this, but there is a halacha for a husband, as his wife is lighting on, you should leave one of the lights off in the room, right? As his wife lights the Shabbos candles, if he happens to be there, when she makes the bracha, to flick the switch at the same time. He's also part of the mitzvah by doing that. Most husbands don't know that, most husbands don't do that, or most husbands forget it. But you can fulfill the mitzvah as long as there's light in the house at the time you're eating specifically, because as Tosfos points out, the food tastes better when you can see it. And owning Shabbos is a very important thing. So what's she worried about? What's she so concerned about? Well, because it's a miracle, she thinks. I mean, it looks like one, smells like one, because it smells like vinegar, not Shemen Zayis, right? And she, the Gemara says you can't rely upon miracles, because maybe the miracle won't happen, in which case you're in big trouble, right? Or maybe it will happen, but it will come off your credit in the world to come, and you don't want that, because it's like changing U.S. dollars into shekels or vice versa. Everybody takes a cut along the way. It doesn't come out the same way. Not like an equal exchange, right? The Sharet Sig is 3.32 or something like that, but this company takes it at 3.3, or like you lose money. You're going to take your schar in a Loma Bab, better yet, like a retirement savings plan. You cash out early, they charge you more tax. So she's worried that maybe I don't want this to come off. I'd rather have no light on Shabbos than have it come off my cheshbon in the world to come. So what's the story here? So he says to her, well, it depends upon you. For me, it's no issue. He says, for me, it's no issue. You know why? Because in my mind, I know that Shemen Zayis, olive oil, burns because God tells it to. So that I know he can make vinegar burn too. Same thing. There's no difference. It's just a question of what his will is at the time. I mean, the Beis Hamikdash burned. It was made from stone. It's one of the miracles of the churban, of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. It shouldn't have burned. He said it burned the whole day and the next day, even though it was stone. So some people want to say it, but there was wood, and said, no, it was a miracle. God made the stone burn. Like literally like wood, because that's what he wanted to do. That was the will of God. There's lots of cases like that. So he answers her daughter and says, if you can look at things like that, the way I look at things like that, then nothing to worry about. It's not called a miracle anymore. It's called nature for you, because you understand that nature anyhow is just God willing things to happen the entire time. It's just that some miracles happen continuously, consistently all the time. That was his answer back to his daughter. And so that's what we're all dealing with. Now the rest of us, we're like bogged down by Asa's perspective, Asa's world. As one person put it, we're so pragmatic today, we don't need trust in God. We don't need a moon anymore. We go to the bank. We just use our credit cards instead. Short of money. It's like we have other ways around it. It's like this idea of having to rely upon Hashem, where once upon a time that's all you could do. It was either do or die. That's just the way it was, until God creates situations where there is nothing else to rely upon. As the expression goes, there's no atheist in a foxhole, meaning that anytime you find yourself in a situation where everything else that you normally rely upon fails you, you turn to God. Who else you going to turn to? But it's guy, now you need me. Now you come to talk to me. I always was bothered by 2 parshas ago. Right? Yaakov is working for Lavan for 14 years, 7 years for Rochel originally, but then they do the switcheroo, right? It gets Leah instead, and they have to work another 7 years for Rachel. He didn't have to wait 7 years to get to be married to her. He was able to marry her right after the Sheva brachas of Leah, but he still had to work the 7 years after that, 14 years altogether. And then he says to Lavan, okay, I've worked for you. I've made your money for you. Now I need to go back home. I need to build up my own wealth. You've been ripping me off the entire time. You've been the worst employer you can possibly imagine. But nonetheless, I need to, so they make a deal, and Yaakov goes out and does this interesting thing where he takes a stick and he cuts this takes off some of the bark and a circle around the thing and puts it in the ground. When the sheep come to water, they see the stick and whatever, and as a result of this, boom, he just becomes a multi-millionaire overnight, and he's rich. He's able to, he in a very short period of time. What's going to happen? What do you think is going to happen? His brothers-in-law look and they see all of a sudden Yaakov, in spite of Laban's best efforts to try to constantly, in a conniving way to try to turn things around and make it that Laban gets the money instead. Whatever as he says, he tells Rachel and Leah, every time your father did this, God did that, and he did that, God did that. He tried, but God wouldn't let him, give you the short end of the stick, literally in this case. And he becomes very well. So what's his brothers-in-law going to say when they see all this? And it happened so quickly. Of course, they're going to say, he got rich off our father. That's where it's coming from. And of course, Laban's saying, boy, that was fast. It took you a lot longer to make me that rich. And here overnight, why didn't you use this for me in the past? It's going to raise eyebrows, just like it has in America and in Canada and in England and anywhere else the Jews have prospered and been successful very quickly. It makes other people look on and say, and as they say, the last thing in the world you want to do is give an anti-Semite a reason to be anti-Semitic. And that's exactly what Yaakov did by becoming rich so fast. But God has no problem with it. Yaakov has no problem with it. And before you know it, he's on his way. And Lavan tries to stop him and get in his way and take everything. He even has the gal, right? He's like the chutzpah to say to Yaakov, you know something? Your wives are my daughters, and your children are my children, and your property is my property. I mean, people are unbelievable sometimes. Incredible. In spite of all that took place and all that he witnessed, in spite of his own words. He says, you know something? If it wasn't for your God, my God could have killed you and done all kinds of terrible things. Wake up. Listen to what you're saying. If your God's so powerful, so then why was my God able to interfere with your plan? You want to kill me. You want to take everything back and steal from me, and you can't do it. You're even telling me that God told you not to speak good or bad. So So what are you talking so much for? My God told you, and you have to dance to his music in the end. So your God's nothing. What are you bragging for? On the contrary, you should be a little bit sheepish over here. Humble yourself, not Lavan, who eventually becomes Bilam. Right? And Bilam, we know the story of Bilam. He's the Gilgal of Lavan in the end. And we see his chutzpah and how he interferes with the Jewish people later on in Moshe Rabbeinu's time. But, what's behind all this story? I mean, it's absolutely amazing because there's so many things going on in these parashiyot. The Torah was given to us to teach us how to behave. As the Ramban points out, Maisa Avos Siman Labanim. What the forefathers did is a sign for the children. It's a lesson it's an education for the children. It's there to teach us how we're supposed to behave and what we're supposed to do. So what am I supposed to do? I need to earn a living. So I get myself a stick and I carve it out on the sides. And I go there in Wall Street, stick it in the ground somewhere, right? Somewhere in front of, Merrill Lynch or something, and just wait for the money to pile up. What am I supposed to do over here? Right? What's the message that Yaakov Avinu is giving over to all of us? Well, the truth is the Gemara talks about this. The Gemara says that everything that we have as a people, as individuals, and as a nation, it's called tzedakah. Doesn't make a difference if you have a job or you don't have a job. You work hard, you don't work hard. Because as the Gemara says in Shabbos, that basically it really comes down to muzzle. Meaning that there are lots of people who will work as hard as you do, if not harder, and still not enjoy the success you're enjoying. And vice versa. There are people who work half as hard as you do, and they still get further ahead. Some guy comes in, makes an investment in the stock market, and that's the one day the stock market goes up. And he makes a killing all of a sudden. And you've been invested for 20 years, and you sold that stock 3 days ago just because it's going down, and just before it went back up again. It's like clearly, muscle. But Yaakov Avinu is teaching us, when it comes to the Jewish people, everything is l'malam teva. The Leshem, Rav Shlomo Eliashiv makes this point very strongly. He says that if you look at the forefathers, each and every one of them, even Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, everybody, by definition, was born miraculously. Even the Shvatim, the Gemara talks about, they didn't go the full term. Everything about them is supernatural. To tell you that the Jewish people themselves are supernatural. That's who we are as a nature. We live above nature. That's one of the rewards of having stood at Mount Sinai and said, Nasif and Nishma, we receive the Torah and we will do the Torah, and then later on work it out. Whatever you say, that's what we'll do. Except for one part. The Gemara says, except for one part. Because they asked the question. It's a very obvious question. The Gemara says, the Torah says in Parashat Mishpatim, that when God said, you want my Torah, we said, Nasiv Nishma. We will do it and we will understand it. And the Gemara says that phrase is actually what the angels say. Angels say, Nasiv Nishma. And God said, who taught my children how to speak like angels? That's what the Gemara says. The same Gemara, right, a little bit above that, before that, says that when God gave his Torah, he lifted the mountain up above our heads, Har Sinai, high above our heads, and said, you want my Torah? And we're all going, where'd the sun go? And God says, well, this mountain's blocking it. And well, why is the mountain in the air like that? And God says, well, it's like this. If you accept my Torah, great. I put the mountain back down exactly where it belongs, and you walk away a Torah nation. If you don't accept my Torah, you will be under the mountain when I put it down, and that's the end of you. So what do you say? You want my Torah or don't you want my Torah? Well, God, you drive a hard bargain. It's like got to tell you, you're very convincing. That mountain in the air like that certainly, doesn't interfere with free will at all. So the Gemara says, wait a second. They just said Nasiv, which came first? If they said Nasiv and Nishma first, so why the mountain? If the mountain went up first in the air, so what? Of course they're going to say Nasiv and Nishma. So what's the big deal? So the Gemara answered by saying that they said Nasiv and Nishma when it came to the written law, the Chamishu Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of Moshe, the scroll we take out of the ark to read on Shabbos and during the week. But when it came to Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law, we said, whoa, That's a lot more than we bargained for. Look at all this. There's a Shulchan Aruch. Before there's a Ram, there's a Rif, there's a Ran, there's a Rosh. There's commentary upon commentary and detail upon detail. The Torah only said we're tefillin. Your arm here. What's a tefillin? What does it look like? So that's in the Shulchan Aruch. You have to eat kosher. How many laws? You want to be mishkiach? You don't just say, I'll be mishkiach. You got to learn to be mishkiach. There's lots of details in the halacha, salting the meat, and which kinds you have to, you're allowed to, you can't eat, right? To get a nasha, get rid of that. It's like complicated. The oral law, the Mishnah, and the Gemara, and all the book. It's not called the Sea of Talmud for no reason. It's not called the lake. It's not called the pond. It's called the sea. It's vast. So that was like, whoa, that's overwhelming. So God said it's a package deal. You got to take the whole thing. So Gemara says that Baruch Hashem, we got around that. Took about 1,000 some odd years, okay, by Purim time. The story of Achashverosh and Mordechai and Esther and Haman, the whole thing like that. That miracle made the Jewish people finally accept the oral law, B'ratzon, with a full heart. Why? I mean, they were living by up until now. Why did that miracle specifically get them to do that? And if they did it back then, so what do we need Chanukah for in the end? We'll have to see, But this is, it's all part of the question. So Yaakov is teaching us through his sheep, right? That parnasa for the Jewish people is lamalam teva. It's supernatural. It's not. It doesn't have. Esav works for a living. We serve God for a living, the Gemara says, and everything that we have, whether we have $1 billion or we got $50 or 50 shekels, depends where you're living, right? It's all tzedakah. It's all tzedakah. And don't be fooled by the fact that you work so hard, you got a good job, because for every reason you can give for why you've been successful, you can find somebody else who does the exact same thing who's not successful. But in Asa's world, for the most part, that's the way it works. That's the system. But that's not the Jewish people. Now, what about the fact that it's antagonizing Lavan and antagonizing his sons and antagonizing Esav and antagonizing anybody who sees how much he has and how quickly he was able to do it? What about all that? Well, you notice everywhere he goes, he's completely protected. But more importantly, let's take a look what happens. What happens? Okay? Well, it's a sequence of events. Yaakov is working the 6 years. He doesn't say I'm going to work for 6 years. He just says I want to not work for the parnasa that I have to make for myself and my family. Excuse me. And he keeps working. So then what brings it to an end after 6 years? How does he know it's time to go? So it says the Torah tells it right there that he heard his brothers-in-law saying not nice things about him. Antagonistic things, not things that the brothers-in-law who like their brother-in-law would say. And then, of course, the clincher was he came home and saw that Lavan did not smile the same way he did in the past. And Yaakov said, "Oh, time to go." That's God's way of saying it's time to go. So he comes home. First there's a prophecy from God who says, "Yep, it's exactly what it is. Time to go home." He comes to Ruch and Leah, explains the whole situation to them, and they say, "Yep, it's time to go home." And they quickly pack everything up and they leave very quickly. So first of all, even this, why leave so quickly? The verse itself says that Yaakov stole the heart of Lavan. Again, first he steals the bruchas from Esav and his father. Now he steals the heart of Lavan. That's not going to make good newspapers, right? It's going to start all kinds of terrible things and blood libels and you name it. But that's what he does. That's what he has to do. But he's protected the entire way. Nothing ever happens to him along the way. He gets home very safe, sound in the end, just like he's supposed to. He has to go through, except for the episode in Shechem, but that's already a different discussion, which is worth having, but not right now. But that's a scenario. So then what do we get out of this? Is it turns out that the making of the money was not what caused anti-Semitism. It's just what brought it to the forefront. It brought it out to the open. What does that mean? So in last week's Parsha, when Yaakov confronts Esav for basically the last time ever, And they meet finally, and Esau tries to bite his neck and kill him that way, but his neck turns to stone, marble, whatever these things mean, but he can't do it. So it says that before Esau's mercy was aroused for his brother, really he wanted to kill him. He didn't have any. The blessings no longer mattered to him, but he still wanted to do harm to Yaakov and his family. So Rashi brings down the Sifri, which says halachahi. It is a halacha. It's the way of the world that Esav soine es Yaakov. That Esav hates Yaakov. That's what it says right there. Rashi brings it down. Sifri. What does that mean? It means we've got it all wrong. I mean, we've been very fortunate. We've grown up at a very peaceful time. Anyone who grew up 100 years ago and 200 years ago and the last 1,000 years in Europe barely knew a day that there wasn't anti-Semitism, that you didn't live in fear of your life. Meeting a Gentile who was respectful, who cared about a Jewish life, was a rare thing. Not like the last 50, 60, 70 years, when it's been pretty good. We've been able to work side by side, shoulder to shoulder for the longest time. Even Orthodox Jews, working downtown. Not a problem, And if there was anti-Semitism, it didn't show up. Only recently, only the last couple of years, has it become more pronounced. Now, how does that work? We learn from Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu was not getting rich for riches' sake. He didn't have to. That's why when he confronts Esav and they talk to each other, and he says, "You take my gift, my brother." And Esav says, "I don't need your gift. Yeshli Rav. I have a lot. I'm a wealthy, powerful individual with stocks and bonds and properties and you name it. What you're giving him make a difference to me." And Yaakov comes back and says, "Yeshli Kol. I have all that I need." And Rashi explains that Esav's words are gaiva, they're pride. He's just talking, he's bragging about what he has. And Yaakov's words are words of humility. I have all that I need. Whatever it is, I have all I need. How could you say that? What about tomorrow? What about saving for a rainy day? So Yaakov says, it doesn't exist by me. Because I know that my parnasa is lamala min hatev, it's supernatural. It comes from God. However, it might come through a banker. It might come through a stock sale. It might come from working hard from 9 to 5. It doesn't make a difference how it comes. The vehicle is the vehicle, but the reality is it's a parnasa. It's a super lamala min hatev parnasa. There's no difference between Shem and Zayas and Chometz. It's all the will of God. What ends up in my pocket before taxes, after taxes, it's all the will of God. It's the malametev, it's supernatural. It's hard to get used to, especially when you're raised in the Western world, to think otherwise. Even the religious world has become so pragmatic, they don't have to think about trusting God so much. That changes in the Holocaust. That changes in situations where all of a sudden everything ends in that good period to teach us type of these things. But the truth is that Yaakov Avinu, when he met Esav, the Medrash says he gave this world, Alom Hazeh, to Esav on a silver platter. Esav wanted to make a deal. I will work and support you, he said, and you take me to the world to come. And Yaakov declined. He said, I don't want, I'm not sharing, I'm not sharing my Olam Haba. You want some? Earn it for yourself. And if I have to suffer in this world, I'll suffer in this world. The Medrash says at that point in time, Yaakov gave this world over to Esav to be his, not ours. What about the fact that we do so well and we're able to support ourselves in certain bits of history? So Gemara says, it's a stipend. It's what God gives us to be able to do more mitzvahs, to earn more reward in the world to come. And that's Yaakov's whole mentality. That's all he's thinking about. That's the only reality he lives in. He has to confront Lavan. He has to confront Esav, very low-life people, but that's not his reality. And he understands that he's only in the diaspora as long as he needs to be there for the sake of building redemption, when God's reality will be clear to everybody. On that day, God will be king of the entire world, and his name, he will be one, and his name will be one. That's, we say in the lane every day. That's the toughie. We say those words, but do you mean them? Because that's the goal. That's all we're working on. That's our whole avoda. Doesn't make a difference what your profession is. That's what a Jew does. A Jew is working on that singular day when finally the whole will go, wow, now we know. It's all been your God, the God of the Torah. He's one. His name is one. What can we do to be part of the story? That's our whole approach to life. That's why God stepped into Mitzrayim, stepped into Egypt, performed the miracles that he did, and saved us supernaturally to teach us that we live supernaturally. The Gemara asked the question. The Gemara says, why is Sinai, Har Sinai, called Sinai? And it asks, it comes back with a couple of answers, and they're all rejected. And some of them are pretty good answers. And finally, the one that's accepted is the one that says, because Sina, hatred, begins on that mountain. It's not even spelled the same word. One's a subic, one's a sim, but they sound the same. The Rashi explains that this is the beginning, really, of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism begins at Har Sinai. Can you imagine that? Here's the most spectacular event in all of human history. It's one of the most mind-blowing events where God comes down over a mountain, speaks to a people, gives them his Torah. It's like a celebration beyond celebration. Nothing comes close. Even building the base of Mikdash doesn't come close to what happened at Har Sinai. Everyone's a prophet. Everyone's experiencing the reality of God firsthand. And you name the mountain where it all happened after the most basest instinct of man? Hatred? So that's also why God lifted the mountain up. God was telling us what determines whether this is Sinai or Sina is you, your attitude towards all of this, your reality, how you live this world. Either you live the world on the level from which Rabbi Chanan ben Dosa's daughter came, where there's nature and there's miracle, in which case you're going to fight the Greeks and lose, not win, but lose. Or you can come up to my reality on my level, where it's no longer an issue of the few overcoming the many. Well, what do you mean? What are you talking about? There was a few Jews and there are a lot of Greeks. Well, remember that story I mentioned before in the past of Elisha and Gehazi, where Elisha, he's a prophet. And the king of Aram wanted to ambush the king of Israel and his troops. And they set the trap. And they waited, and it turned out that the king of Israel knew but in advance and avoided it. And when the king of Aram found out that was the case, he got angry and he blamed his own army because somebody was telling secrets to the Jewish people. Who was it? But the general said, no one here. We're all loyal. They got this prophet Elisha who knows what God tells him, so he tells the king of Israel, and that's why he's getting away. So the king of Aram says, well, let's deal with that one. Let's go take care of him. Let's knock him off. Put a contract out on his life and avoid the whole situation. So they find out where Elisha is. They surround the town. Gehazi, his young lad's right-hand man, right, comes out and sees the army surrounding them. And he thinks, we're finished. We're done. There's no way we can fight back, prophet or no prophet. We can't fight an army that large. And he tells Elisha, and Elisha says, what? Nothing to worry about. So what do you mean nothing to worry about? How are you going to fight these people? There's so many of them right now. And Elisha says, we outnumber them. Have you been drinking? It's like, what are you talking? Are you seeing double or triple or quadruple? No, what are you talking about? So Elisha at that point says, God, open the lad's eyes. Open the lad's eyes. And he sees a vision. He sees angels, military angels, all over the hills surrounding, Aram, and he says, wow, I didn't see that before. Remember, Moshe looks this way and that way, and he's able to see things that the average person cannot see. And Abraham goes up with the Akedah, and he can see the Shekhinah, but Eliezer and Yishmael cannot see that vision and get left behind with the donkey. And Chizkiah, who was almost Mashiach, is surrounded by 185,000 battalions, a United Nations troop of its time. It was literally made up of different nations under Sennacherib, the Assyrian. And they surround the Jewish people in this little old city, not like the one today, the big Yerushalayim, but a small city, walled city, and they can't go anywhere. The Shevna decides that he wants to capitulate, he wants to surrender. What else can you do? So he sends out an arrow saying that some of us want to surrender and Chizkiah doesn't, and we'll see what we can do to, like, don't attack us. Anyhow, so at that point in time, they take a vote, and turns out the majority chooses to surrender. So Chizkiah figures, what can I do? I don't want to surrender, but Achri Rabbi Nahatos, after the majority of the vote goes. So therefore, I have to go with the majority. Yeshaya the prophet shows up and says, no, that idea of the majority ruling only counts if all the people voting are qualified voters. These guys are Rishoyim. They're evil people. They don't believe, they don't trust God. They're just cowards. So their vote doesn't count. Majority rules. The majority says not to give it, not to surrender. So Chizkiah says, okay, that's the case. I'm going to bed. I'm going to have a good night's sleep. You're surrounded by this massive, huge, massive army that's ready to pounce the first time morning sun comes up. Now, they could have attacked that night, but Sennacherib, being the evil person, he wanted to enjoy it. He wanted to see what he was doing. He wanted to see all the murder and all the killing. So let's wait until the morning and let them sweat the entire night. Bad choice. Well, it wouldn't have happened anyhow, but bad choice, because in the end, Chizkiah went to bed, had a great night's sleep. The next morning he wakes up, and all Sennacherib's army is lying dead or have fled. In the middle of the night, some plague, not just the flu, not just indigestion, some kind of plague in the middle of the night came to the camp and killed massive amounts of people. And Sennacherib was now on the hook for all these troops of other nations that he just lost for no reason. And Shredna, who came out because he thought, now I can go out because he got killed in a brutal way. And Chizkiah wakes up the next morning and everything is misudar. It's all beseder, big miracle. Huge miracle. And then this is Jewish history. I mean, and you can say, well, that was Tanakh. But you can go through World War II and you can find the miracles. It's just, unfortunately, like any solar eclipse, they get blocked out by the darkness, right? But the state of Israel was formed after that, and that was a miracle. And that was voted, favorably. That was a miracle. And that FDR got the power and died 3 months later, and Truman took over, who was not his original running mate, and decided to vote and push the vote in the UN to give Israel to the Jewish people. That was a miracle. And all the wars, existential wars that took place after that, were all miracles. And the buildup of the country since that time is all a miracle. I mean, just one upon, yeah, but that's not like the same kind of miracle back. What are you talking about? Yeah, I'll tell you why it's different. I'll tell you why the miracle is different. And it's not God's fault. It's our fault, if you can call it a fault, or our misunderstanding, or our shortcoming, whatever you want to call it. But it comes from our side. We know, right? We know that this world has levels. There's the physical level we're living on right now, but the spiritual world has 5 different levels. And as you go further up, they become more and more spiritual. As they become more and more spiritual, they become more godly, holier in the end. Right? We say, right, by the near Chanukah. See how fast I can find it here. Okay. And there's halalu anachtim malakim alanisim alanifluas. Right, we're lighting these candles, right? These candles that we're lighting for the miracles and the wonders that you did, for all the salvation, for all the milchemas and all the wars, like we said before. That you did for our forefathers at this time. Right, this is what we say by the lighting of the candles itself. All yedei kohanecha doishim, through the holy kohanim. Very important. That's a very important part, but not for right now. The kol shmonos yemei Chanukah hanerz halalu kodesh. Right, all 8 days. Right, all the days that we're lighting these candles, they're kodesh. Now we don't say that by Shabbos candles. It's Shabbos is kodesh, and we do it l'chavos Shabbos kodesh. But the candles themselves, we don't call them kodesh. They're kodesh in as much as using them for Shabbos. Fine. But we don't make any bruch. We don't make any declaration that they're kodesh. Why are we claiming here that the Ner Shel Chanukah are kodesh? Why do we need that? What do you gain from saying those words? Just say the first part's enough. I hereby light these candles for the sake of the fact I'm commemorating the great miracles done for my forefathers, the time of the Chashbonaim, by lighting these candles because of all the things that were done for the Jewish people. Great, fantastic. It says it all. What do you mean? Haneres halu kodesh heim. You know what kodesh heim means? They're nivdal. To use the lashon of the Maharal. Nivdal means they're separate. They belong to a different reality. Like Shabbos is a different reality. You know why you can't do malach on Shabbos? Why can't you do malach on Shabbos? Why can't you do 39 creative activities on Shabbos as prescribed by the oral law? Why can't you do them? I mean, tell me, why can't you do them? Because God said so. Okay, fine. But why did God say so? Why on Yantif can you do some things, but not all those things, and the rest of it, some holidays you can even do malacha, on Purim you can do malacha, But why? What's the difference? Why is Shabbos different? What's the chilul? What's the profanation? What profane Shabbos? So every kid grows up, goes to shul with their parent, right? And you're sitting in shul and you do something, it's okay for the street, but not okay for the shul. And your father said, "Not here. Don't do that here. Don't do that in shul." Well, why not? It's not the proper place for it. It's like it's special. You have to respect it. You have to show respect. Not every father understands why, but it's the place. It's a house of God. There are things you can't do in the Beis Hamikdash. It's just a building. It's the same air, right? It's the same level. Okay, it's a little higher up in a hill, but you can find a higher hill than Har Bayis, and still won't have the same kedusha as Har Bayis, because we know what's the difference. The reason why you cannot do malacha on Shabbos is because on Shabbos you go to a higher level of reality where malacha is no longer relevant. It's not appropriate anymore. You're doing something mundane on a level of kedusha that's far from it. You're doing the wrong. It's inappropriate. Don't do that here. And it's such a destruction. What you do by doing it, it's like you break out of the bubble. You allow yourself to leave the realm of Shabbos and go down into the world of Chol. When someone breaks Shabbos deliberately, and even accidentally to something, which is why you have to bring a sacrifice to atone for it. It's less bad because it's accidental. But certainly if you break Shabbos deliberately, it's like basically you're saying, I want out. I want to go back to the everyday mundane reality. Kodesh means nivdal. It means on a higher level of light that Chanina ben Dosa was talking about with his daughter. They were talking on the same floor, eye to eye, more or less. But if you could see it spiritually, he's way up here looking down at her, and she's looking up at him, and he's trying to bring her up to a level where the light is accessible, where evil by definition is outnumbered. There are 5 worlds altogether. In Hebrew, they're called the Sia, Yetzira, Bria, Tzilus, and Adam Kadmon. They all have definitions. They're all, it can be explained, and Kabbalistically, it's all laid out, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is that they can be measured, differently based upon where you are. So, for example, the world that we live in post the sin of the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, is mostly evil and only a little bit good. That's the level that we live on, which explains what's going on in the States today, which explains what went on in Stone back in its time, which explains what goes on all around the world on an ongoing basis. Why can't the world be good overall? Why can't we just have, why can't people be straight and do the right thing? Why has there be atheism and agnosticism? Because we grow behind the spiritual 8 ball. We're living in a level of reality which is mostly bad and a little bit good. So when you're good, it's really good. And when you do the right thing, it's like you're working against a lot of forces, and God really appreciates it. The level above that, which is a level of Shabbos basically called Yetzira, which we go into on Shabbos. So that level is half and half, 50-50. It's 50% good, so to speak, and 50% bad. It's not supposed to be that way, but that's what happened because of Adam's sin. You go a level higher, to the level of Bria, which is basically Rechanim Bedos is living, it's mostly good and only a little bit of evil. It's very hard to do a sin on that level. But you have to earn the right to be there. You have to get there by not sinning and rising spiritually the entire time. That's what the Shabbos candles are. The level of Yetzirah. But the level of Bria, and really the level of Tzilis, and the level of higher, that's what the Ner Chanukah are. That's what that Kodeshim means, that you may be lighting the candles down here, even just 10 tfachim off the ground, so close to the earth, they're right there for everyone to see. But you should know, when you light them and you make the bruchas with the proper kavanah, the proper intention, and you have the proper understanding, and you're devoted and your heart's in it, and you really understand what you're trying to accomplish, you're trying to access the hidden light of creation, you're trying to open up channels to God as high up as you can possibly get, then you access a Ner Chanukah. You know what it says? The rabbis, they were the ones who came along and said, you have to light a menorah. It's not prescribed in the Torah, right? It's called a mitzvah zakanim, a mitzvah of the elders. So a person might come along and say, what's the big deal? It's only a rabbinical mitzvah, not a Torah mitzvah. So I can afford to be sloppy. I can afford to miss. I can afford to do it in not the ideal way. Big mitzvah to do it in the ideal. I don't. You have to. It's only there, but even people who live by Torah, and that's only mitzvah rabbanan. All the time, like, it's only rabbinical mitzvah. So you have to be. When the rabbis tell us that, you can be lenient. Okay, so that it's okay. But for us to say that, so the Zohar says, yeah, you think so? You should know that when you light your menorah the way it's supposed to be lit, God does the same thing. He lights a menorah too, because the rabbi said so. Chabad has big menorahs. I just saw them, they're setting up one not so far from here, downtown New York. Big menorahs. So how big is God's menorah? Must be massive, no? Just like his tefillin. God is, infinite. So is menorah infinite? What does it look like? How does he light it? Does he make brachas too? Does he stand there and saying, and there's halalu? What does it mean? So the Zohar explains, no, it's not like that. God's lighting of the menorah is that when he sees you open the door down at your end, he opens the door at his end, so to speak. Keviyocha. He opens the door to a level called Atika Kadisha, all the way up in its sealets. It's so high up that normally we can't even talk about it that much. We have no way to reach it on our own. It's just even Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't see that high up. You can see up towards it, but not in that world. It's just so high up in the system. But on Chanukah, God opens the door and lets light come down to us. You see, the Chanukah challenge is what the Chashmonaim fulfilled. That's what they did. They were living until that time, not completely, but partially, on the level of the Greeks. The same way that we live in the level of the Americans. We live in the level, the Satmar Rebbe. I don't agree with a lot of things the Satmar say, especially when it comes to Israel. But what I heard they said recently, this I can't disagree with. He was bemoaning the fact of how involved Jews became in the American election, how much they took up the cause, how much they were related to it, like the average American did. And he recognized the danger in that, because that's not who we are. You have to understand, when you do that, you change your divine providence. Because God says the following thing: you want to live like a Greek? Then it's a package deal. You get the whole thing. The same things that affect them naturally are going to affect you naturally. The same illnesses they suffer, you're going to suffer them too. The same rules of parnasa that they live by, you live by them too. Because that's the way it works. If you want to live down on the level where Shem and Zayis burns because A, it's just naturally combustible, right? That's B, because that's just the way the world is, right? Which is really the same thing, I guess, right? Or you want to come up to a level where there's no difference, that's your choice. But you have to understand, if you light the Ner Chanukah on that level, doesn't do very much. It's not going to change very much. Nice, spin the dreidel, eat some latkes, but Chanukah is going to come and go, and you'll have missed the most important opportunity the entire year, if not your entire life. But what about Pesach? No, Pesach depends upon Chanukah. And Shavuos, the giving of Torah, depends upon Chanukah. And Sukkot, Chanukah. Rosh Hashanah, Chanukah. Yom Kippur, Chanukah. Why Chanukah? It says that the din, the judgment, begins on Rosh Hashanah and it ends on Chanukah. Well, let's one to do the other. Because Chanukah, the word Chanukah comes from the word chinuch, dedication. Chanukah rededicates the entire year. All the lights, which is what the holidays are anyhow. Pesach is one light, and Shavuos is another light, and Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, they all have their own different lights from different periods of history in the future. Chanukah is the light of Mashiach, which is why Chanukah will not be a holiday in the Muslim Mashiach, because every day will be Chanukah. So every 8 days from the 25th of Kislev onward, you're actually living in the time of Mashiach for 8 days. For 8 days. Now, that's an amazing thing, but you're still walking around the same world? Well, not really. And people who actually are able to achieve this, they are different. The same way a person was once secular and becomes Baal Tshuva, that's one level of it. You're not the same. You can't even relate to things the way you once did. You watch what people do, what they invest their time and money in their life. How could you? I once did that too, but I could never do it today. Because you're accessing a higher level of light. Now go further. Chanukah says, come up to my level. It's an invitation to go all the way up. On the level that the Chashmonaim reached on the 25th of Kislev, they fought to get there for 24 days. To Baruch Shem Kavod Machuso, they fought to get there. On the 25th day, they reached it. They got to the level of the Ner Shel Chanukah. On the level that they were on, they became the many. And the Greeks became the few. Because now they were fighting them on their own terms, on the terms of the Ner Shel Chanukah. Just words, right? Just words. But that's the opportunity. So, it's coming up as Rosh Hashanah. Take the time. Like Lamaisa, practically speaking, take the time. Don't, put everything you have into the lighting itself. And as you're lighting, think to yourself, I am able to ascend and access higher levels. In the base of Mikdash, the menorah had 3 steps to light the menorah. And they asked the question, what were the steps necessary for? Since you could reach each candle without them. Why did the Kohen have to walk up these steps to make this point? You may be letting them down here in this world, but the candles themselves access the Or HaGanuz, which is way up there. You have to go up to actually light it properly. Ba'alosecha.